Welcome to session 18, Visualization Made Easy with Enscape. I'm very, very grateful for the support of Enscape and the support that they have provided us as a platinum sponsor of this event. This is a sponsored session by Enscape specifically, and I strongly encourage you to take the time to have a look further into their product, specifically after you see what I talk through as part of this presentation and see how it can be utilized as part of your workflows within your practice. It's a tool I believe in, and it's a tool that I think that would be of benefit to most, if not all, Archicad practices across the globe. Now I'll move on to my presentation. Welcome to the session. Now let's talk through what we're going to cover in this short session today. So first of all, I want to touch off on a bit of an introduction and give a little bit of history in behind, I guess, why visualization is important. Second of all, it's about communication, how we communicate with stakeholders and the people that we interact with as architects. Then I'm going to move on to talking about picking your tool in terms of which tool is right for you. Then we're going to go on to a live demonstration, and then I'll close out with a conclusion. So just a little bit of an introduction here. So first of all, I want to start with a bit of a history lesson and why I learned very young on in my career about the importance of communication. And we're going to go back to architecture school. Now for me, this is 20 years ago. And I remember in second year university, one of my tutors saying to me, "Nathan, your hand drawings are crap. You really need to find a better way or a new way of communicating your ideas, because the way in which you're trying to do it right now, you're not going to see much success moving forward." Now that led me on a journey where I ended up teaching myself in Archicad and thankfully being obviously reasonably good at it and finding different ways and better ways of communicating. So very early on in my career, I identified the methodologies of communication need to be adapted to work. You can't just go off and communicate in the way in which you think is just going to be okay. You need to adapt to who you have to essentially present it to. So basically, in that early stage of my career, I learned very much the key issues and the key criteria behind communication. So all of the things that are really, really important that need to be done as an architect and what that means. So one of the things that I really like doing is kind of going back to the kind of artistic, the kind of creative architect. And architects love doing sketches. Now, this sketch from Frank Gehry is good for him. It kind of gives this kind of concept behind where his idea comes from in his head. But from a communication standpoint, it doesn't really clearly explain what the design is going to be to the stakeholders. So this is where I kind of stress out with the concept of traditional architects. Architects are still fixated by the concept of producing artwork and sketches and drawings, but really, are they the best communication method for communicating to your stakeholders? Now, the problem is that we as architects are communicating with multiple stakeholders throughout the whole life cycle of the asset. But be it the actual client at the start, where they've given us a design brief and then we're communicating back to them and their user groups, understanding what their needs are and then being able to communicate back to them. It's about being able to communicate to our consultant team so our consultants know what our design intent is, so they can then work alongside us to deliver a successful project. It's about authorities, communicating the design intent to the authorities so you get all the appropriate approvals. And the last step being that you're communicating to the contractors and the subcontractors that assist to actually turn your design concept into a reality. So it's very, very challenging to understand. We have so many different stakeholders along the loop. Now, there are certain things where we have to look at the way in which people understand drawings. Now, a traditional approach that architects would take is they'd take a set of 2D drawings, a set of floor plans and some room elevations, and they would take those and present them to a client. Now, the biggest problem you have is that most of the clients that we sit down with, the stakeholders from the client side, are not trained to read architectural drawings. So what we're doing is presenting information to them they actually don't understand. And human nature, unfortunately, is at a point where we will actually sit there and see them nodding their head and agreeing to say that they understand what we're saying. But the reality of it is they actually don't understand what they're looking at. So we're looking here at the top of the pyramid that there's only a very few number of people that can actually read and understand architectural 2D drawings in the form of elevations and plans. So we need to think and expand our mind a little bit more. Now moving into 3D, this is the still perspective kind of approach. So this is where we've gone and built a model up, and out of that model we've turned around and built up, we have a scenario whereby there's still a reasonable portion of the world's population that actually still cannot understand when they look at a photo render. They actually don't have the depth perception in their brain to actually be able to read that drawing. Now, as architects, it's very hard for us to understand that. Hard to understand that something that's so simple for us is so hard for others. But I can guarantee you now that there is a portion of your stakeholders that still cannot visualize and see what it is when it's a still perspective. So that's when we go to the next step and we go through to fly-throughs or walkthroughs and preset movies where people can experience the space. Now this does take our 3D still perspective to the next level, but then what we're seeing is people are struggling still, and this is the honest truth from my experiences and conversations with people. There are people out there that still cannot understand that space when it's in a driven movie that they're sitting there and watching. Now that's when it comes down to the next step of virtual reality. Now virtual reality, it pushes us into another realm whereby people can actually have a sense of space because they've got a headset on and they can turn their head around and actually understand the space that they're in. Now I can honestly tell you that every person that I've ever put a headset on has been able to understand where they're getting and where they're going. And the positive is that Enscape and as a tool assists us as architects and Archicad users to achieve the 3D through to the virtual reality level as a drawing output. So from my perspective, that's where Enscape adds value in terms of making more realism for those three items there. Now, the future, I guess, will be augmented reality, and Enscape doesn't cover off on that. Not many apps do, and there's not really much connectivity to Archicad right now that can achieve this, but that will be the next step moving into the future in terms of people being able to understand and recognize space as they can see it relevant to existing conditions. Now, picking your tool, there are a number of real-time rendering engines available on the market right now. And the reality of it is that it is kind of like picking a Phillips head screwdriver versus a blade screwdriver. They're kind of the same and not the same. So they basically do the same thing, but they're just slightly different in the way they approach things. So that's the one thing that people need to consider when they actually look at this as a tool and when they look at it with other comparisons. But from my perspective, this is kind of my kind of assessment on it before we go into the live demonstration. So first of all is licensing. So Enscape in Australian dollars is around $600 to $650 per individual license per year. And that's for a fixed license on a computer, but you can also get a roaming network license for around 1,000 Australian dollars. From my perspective, that's actually really cheap for what it actually achieves compared to the prices at which we pay for our other tools that we're using to deliver our projects. Yes, there is a competitor on the market right now that is free for Archicad users to use, so that needs to be bared in mind. So that's what we kind of work against when we're talking about our comparisons. The learning curve. Now, the one thing that I can say about Enscape is that the learning curve of this tool is almost instantaneous. In my experiences when I was at Fulton Trotter, when we first implemented Enscape before I left, we had junior staff picking up Enscape and basically producing high quality renders with very little to no assistance or training whatsoever. Now, from my perspective, that ticks a huge box. Now, the reason for that is because when you want to be able to learn something and be able to implement something quickly, you want it to be really easy to learn and quick and easy to learn. From my opinion, the time to learn the alternative platform that's available for Archicad users, the time I think to learn that tool is probably 2 to 3 times longer to actually understand it, because the user interface, for starters, is substantially more complex. So I think that's where Enscape wins in terms of the time you save in actually understanding and learning how to use it. Now, connectivity. This is another key component. Through my testing that I've done over the years, the connectivity between Archicad and Enscape is substantially better than the alternative. Now, that's through my experience and the number of crashes I've heard some people have. Yes, there is a negative in which Enscape only works on PC. So that's one flaw that it currently has for Archicad offices that are working on Mac. One of Enscape's well-known users from the Revit community, and Phil Reed, actually is a Mac user and runs it in parallels. But I've always struggled with that concept of running things in parallel. So for a PC office, I think it's the best solution in terms of connectivity. From the testing I've done of other platforms and seeing how buggy the connection was working, this one works a lot better for me. Now, quality of output. Now, this is where I come back to the conversation I had before in and around the situation with there's 2 screwdrivers. So we've got our 2 screwdrivers, our Phillips head and our blade. In all honesty, both of these platforms, Enscape and the alternative platforms, produce very good outputs, especially if you do a little bit of training. And once you've done a little bit of training and you have a few things in place set up within your template, the ability for Enscape to produce very, very high-end outputs straight from straight open up Enscape and hit the save button from Archicad is extensive. But if you have all your textures set up already as part of your Archicad template, enhanced for Enscape, you can be knocking these things out on every single project with a couple of clicks. To me, that's important. The one downside, I guess, is that Enscape, compared to its competitor, doesn't have animated outcomes. Yes, the trees will mimic moving in the wind, but we don't have animated characters. Now, that being said, the time it takes to actually place animated characters, get them to do exactly what you want to do, the question is that really what you need to achieve to actually sell your vision for your project? So from my perspective, it's not something I need. So then we roll all those together. So we roll all these things together to kind of actually determine overall cost, because there's the hard cost, which a lot of people tend to look at and think that's actually the only cost you have as a business. Well, no, it's not. The cost of licensing is one thing. The cost of learning is another. And then the speed in which you can produce an output is also the consideration factor. Now, each of those items have a kind of a percentage, I guess, of how much it overall cost is for implementation. From my perspective, the speed in which I can achieve an output from our Enscape on a project-by-project basis is far quicker than what I can do with a competitor software. So the time to learn is less as well. So it actually well and truly offsets the licensing cost that you're paying compared to the free option. And to be perfectly clear, I, in the last fortnight, had some work going on for a specific client where I honestly could tell you with one project, despite the number of projects I've got running, the software has actually paid for itself in this last fortnight alone. So that's one of the things that I kind of think is really important to understand, is that focus on everything regarding cost. Look at how long it takes to actually produce these things, and you'll realize that actually Enscape, despite the licensing cost, which actually isn't that much, is actually a really good solution in terms of your overall cost overall. So now let's move over to the live demonstration. And within that live demonstration, and we won't go through all of these too much detail, but we'll talk about preparing your physical model, in terms of getting the Enscape libraries. We'll talk about preparing your materials and textures, because I think that's really important. Lighting, which actually enhances your night scenes, because everyone likes using night scenes as part of their packages that they produce. Streamlining production using presets, the live connection and how that works, and also what are the outputs that you can get from Enscape to achieve what you need to achieve. So items that we're going to cover today is preparing your physical model, and that including the Enscape library. So primarily you want to do all of the modeling that you normally need to do to prepare visualization to demonstrate your architecture. But the Enscape library, when it's plugged into it, it enhances or essentially adds a reality to what's actually going on in your model. So first of all, we go into our ground floor plan. You can see here we've just got an architectural house, and within it, it's not very much going on. It's just a simple house. Then we see that in its 3D state, and we can fly around that and have a look and see, you know, it's a reasonable architectural style house, but it's missing a lot, you know, in terms of trying to tell the picture, in terms of trying to sell the dream, the vision to your clients and exactly what's going on. So it's really, really important that we start activating that and putting some stuff in from the Enscape library. So the Enscape library can be accessed via the Enscape toolbar, which you can load up within your Archicad work environment. And we have a series of buttons over on this side here. So in Enscape 3.0, there are different toolbars from within Archicad and within Enscape, so they both have their separate purposes. So this one that we're going to act with right now is the asset library. So we're going to open that up. Now within the asset library, the Enscape asset library is broken up into, there's about 2,500 assets. As you can see here at the top, there's just under 2,500 assets. Now it's got a subcategories through here, and then tagged as well. So it's trying to enable you to find things quite easily. So in this instance, let's just go for a person that's going to walk. So you can see here, this is not what they're called, but they're tagged. It's tagged in there to actually find it. So let's pick these two nice young people here, and we'll put them right here. So that is facing the wrong way. It just places it in a default position. So now we've placed those. Now, because we've only got a short session, take quite a while to actually go through and see how long it's going to take to actually show you all of the steps that are required to essentially dress up this model. But right now, you can see here, before the session, I went through and furnished and landscaped and provided some additional context in the street with an Enscape. So what you can see here, we have our neighbourhood all modelled in and included. So we've got our neighbourhood trees. Enscape comes with cars, street furniture, houses even. So it means you can put some context in beside you in terms of all your neighbours, all of those exciting things. Now, purposely, all of these items you can see here don't look very nice in Archicad. That's to reduce the number of polygons so it doesn't bog down your model. When you start to work with landscape items that are more photorealistic, you end up with a problem whereby in Archicad it'll bog down due to the number of polygons. So essentially these are placeholders or proxies within Archicad that enable the rendering software to actually do its job in the back end. So let's just jump into Enscape now and see what this actually looks like. So this is the before. So you can see here already we have a situation where, yep, it looks pretty dull, not very exciting. So now what we're going to use is one of the tools within Enscape's work environment, which is the View Manager. And let's just click, and these are all the views. So all of these views here are saved, or the Archicad saved views. So let's just click between those now. Takes a little moment, just tries to remember exactly what's going on. So it takes you to the point where you save the view within Archicad, plus all the layers that you have turned on. So you can see here the young man and his child that are walking along that we placed in before. We have our cyclists walking on the pathway. Thankfully in Queensland you're allowed to have cyclists allowed on the pathway. All of the landscape. So you can see here the cars, you've got trees, houses, so we've got a whole neighbourhood surrounding us, which is one of those things where when you're trying to sell a vision to a client, it's really, really critical to try and give them some context of what their surroundings are. Now this is obviously the case where you don't have any context, that you haven't been able to model up yourself. You've been able to just put some stuff in. So some of the exciting things with this is obviously we have 3D grass and it's blowing in the breeze, and you'll understand how that works quite nicely when we move forward onto later in the presentation in terms of showing you the outputs. We have exciting outcomes with water. So water actually ripples, and we go through out into the pool area, and we have some nice landscape out here, and we can see people diving in, people playing sport and the like. So there's lots of fun things here. Now, to make this to the next level and take this to the next level, there's a couple more things I think that's really important to talk through with you. So let's go back into Archicad and let's talk about textures. So there's a really important thing in terms of moving your Archicad model forward, and they're the textures. So this is one of many sites, and Enscape do have a series of webinars, technical webinars on how to use Enscape with Archicad. So I thoroughly encourage you to go over and to watch those webinars, because Kai from Enscape actually goes in a lot more detail about how all of this works. We don't have enough time to go into all that detail today, but this is one of the texture websites here. And you can see here I have downloaded and loaded into a library that I have loaded in Archicad. I actually have a folder saved with all of these textures, and it's saved off into my into a folder. That folder gets loaded as a library within Archicad so I can see it. So you can see here PBR materials actually don't just come as a single image, they come as a collection of images, and we'll see in a moment why that's really, really important. So one of the things that's really frustrating, I guess, when you're designing and you use out-of-the-box Archicad textures is that, so we're sitting here right now and we can see here that we have our wall, and I've just applied a different texture to this wall right now. So let's just go over into Enscape, and we'll go over to our wall, and it should take us around, spin us around. So right now, it's looking kind of flat, and it's not looking that exciting. So to get, Enscape has the ability of using those different layers or different images and stacking them on top of one another to provide realism in the imagery. So what we want to do, let's go back into Archicad. And what we want to use here now is the Enscape Materials. Now what I've done to speed this process up a little bit, because once again it's a live demonstration, is I have gone and created a duplicate. So now I've updated this within Archicad. So I've got a new texture, but I'd like to show you how I got this. So within the Enscape Materials, this has all of the surfaces within Archicad. So this is basically a replication of all the surfaces within Archicad. So before, when I talked about all of the different levels of the same image that you get with a PBR image set. So we have here our color brick, which is the brick that you can see in Archicad. Then we have displacement, because you want to be able to have a displacement in the material to demonstrate how it actually moves. And then I've got a roughness setting as well. So what we'd like to do here is just run a test and see how this works. So let's go back into Enscape. Let's change our view up to refresh. So we've refreshed our material here. Now what I want to do is open up the materials palette within Enscape, and let's just do this quickly here. And let's open up our materials, and we'll just get this over to the left. Let's bring up our materials, MA06. And let's just drop that in, zoom in a little bit on our material. And let's just play with a few of these settings here. Now they take a little while to drop in, but you can see here just by changing that, it creates obviously not what you're looking for, but just by adjusting these settings on this brickwork, you can see how you can get a little bit of texture. Obviously there's some things here that aren't right, but in terms of the way in which you use these maps, and then you can get roughness as well from the material. So you can see here, as I adjust this slider, the brick starts to show a bit of texture on it as well. So all of this adds to the realism, because when we have real life, these materials are not flat. So you can see up here this nice rough texture that we've got attached up here, and I can't for the life of me remember what paint finish I have applied to that. So paint finish 4. So let's have a look at paint finish 4 as well while we're here, and see how all of this is addressing this. So we've got a roughness setting here that's set to 3. We can make it even rougher because it's, you know, the concreter did a really bad job, or that's what you actually wanted in your formwork, or it could just be a really minor blemish on your concrete. So all of these little things add to making the actual realism of your materials and textures look a lot better. So that's kind of a really important thing in terms of the first thing we want to get right, obviously, is the assets and getting all of them in place so that you've got enough context of your model and your model's appearing correctly. Then we want to then get all the textures right. So all of the materials and the textures within Archicad are set up correctly so that we get some realism. And now what we want to do is we need to move over to lighting. So this is a really cool feature, and I'll show you in a second how this works in Enscape. So what we need to do to get our lighting to look right, and let's just go over to this side here. So within Archicad, there is the ability, and I think I have a light placed over here. Yes, I do. I have a light placed over here. So what I do is, when we go over here, this is an out-of-the-box Archicad light. Now, from my perspective, I don't really get excited by the way in which this turns out. So it doesn't represent how a real light's actually going to look. So it's kind of not really a true meaning of itself. So let's go back out here, and this is one of the examples I'd like to show you. So you can see these 4 light fittings here. And, you know, at the moment it doesn't look very realistic, does it? Like, we can see some light coming out of them, we can see a light fitting. So in Archicad, I think the number one way in which you can produce really good outcomes in terms of how you want your lighting to appear is we need to use IES light. So we use the IES light from Archicad under the general lighting. We get our hands on the lighting that we want. So we actually get the IES settings from the manufacturer of the light you actually want. Then you pair that up with the geometry. So you model the geometry of the light fitting that you actually got from the manufacturer if you can't get it from them in either an Archicad library part or a IFC or all those other formats you're available to you. So then the third component, which then makes the lighting pop and sing, you'll see here that I have put a 5mm thick material, which is out of my templates, just a generic translucent white. So what we need to do here, and this is one of the other powerful things about Enscape, is we're going to go back into the material settings, and let's go to this material, and let's make this illuminate. So this is one of the wonderful things about Enscape. We can change the color of the light as well, and I don't want to make, we could make it a blue light, but let's not do that today. Let's pick a white, but we could even go to a more advanced thing and pull it into the kind of the more daylight spectrum and just off-white it slightly. We can pick the luminance, and I think at 5000 is reasonable. You can drop it back if you want, and it can just be a lighter approach, let's just go with that to see how we go. So what we have is 3 components. We have our geometry of our light, we have the IES light settings from our light manufacturer, and now we have kind of the bloom that you get from a light fitting. So let's go into Enscape, and now when we're standing here, you can see that additional change to the Enscape material now has live changed, and that's the positive of all this. You're getting live updating, right? So we're getting live updates from the material changes in Archicad to the material changes in Enscape. So now we have this scenario where that lighting looks quite realistic. Now, when we're playing with Enscape, there's a numerous things that we're having going on here. So you can't see right now, but I'm holding down the shift key and I'm right clicking on my mouse. So over on the bottom right corner, you'll see that it's midnight right now. Most people shouldn't be awake at that time of the night, but we can control the time of day. So now it's daytime. We have a daylight, and depending upon how you want to view, this is all connected directly to Archicad, so it is the real settings for your site. So you can see here, as the day progresses, we're starting to see the sun shift over the house, and the lights turn on. The lights turn on at dusk, which is really, really nice. But what this enables it to do is all of the assets shadow. So it's not just the buildings that shadow. So you can see up here, we're getting shadowing from the tree, which I think, to my mind, is, you know, pretty spectacular. You're getting all of these this geometry is creating moving shadows over your building throughout the day. So that's kind of one of the settings you can play with, to not play with really. You're actually getting to see exactly how your house performs or your building performs in the designated environment that you actually have. Now, moving through to the next thing, there's a whole series of other settings in here. Collaborative annotation, so you can annotate in here, and this is what's linked to BIM track. We actually have also BIM mode, which is where all the information out of Archicad gets populated when you click on the information. Video editor, which we won't go into too much detail now, and we'll talk about the exports in a moment, but I want to touch on some of the presets. So in terms of view management, you can walk around in three ways. My preferred method's 2-point perspective, because that's kind of how I view the world. This is for fly and walk mode, which is directly connected to VR. Once again, VR is really, really hard for us to present to you remotely right now. We can't really present how well VR actually works for you as a person watching from remote. But all I have to say is trust me in saying that my clients have been wrapped when they've done that. But this is where I think it's really, really important in terms of visual settings. So we go into our visual settings here, and what I have minimized over here is the presets button. So this is actually one of the new features in Enscape 3.0, which I like. Haven't gotten a lot into it yet, but one of the things I think that's really important is that when you're presenting an early design to your client, you want your client to be not focusing on the colors of the materials. You want them to be focusing on maybe the spaces and how they relate to one another. Enscape enables you to make the materials disappear. So right now, we can walk around this model and make the client focus purely on what spaces are and how they relate to one another. So I think that in itself is a spectacular setting. Now, what we want to be able to do is we want to set up our outlines. So then the outline mode gives a little line on the outside of all of the angles. So you can see here it's turned into a very, very sketchy output, as if you've done it with a big thick pen. But just applying a slight outline to elements when it's in black and white mode can give a really powerful outcome. Now, what I want to do is I can set and create a preset now, and let's call this white model. Now, I've only just touched on one of these items here, but we can go into here and touch all of the contrasts, all of the effects we can attach to these things. So one of the things that some photographers like doing is vignette mode. So you can see here how it's tightened in and it's created the darker outcome around the outside. We talked about the bloom before, so let's go back in quickly, change the time of day to night. Now what I want you to do is look at these lights that we have sitting there. See how now I'm adjusting the bloom, and you can see how much it's washing out the light, or the illumination is washing out. Now it's disappeared, so it's turned it off. Lens flare, so that's how the lens reacts to light, direct light into it. Motion blur, that's more related to moving. We've talked about vignette, and this is here. So one of the other things that's really good in Enscape is that if you don't know what something does, if you hover over one of the settings, you can actually see what it does as well. You can come in and change the atmosphere, fog. One of the other things that people who love photography can do also is change the depth of field and field view. I always kind of walk around in my my fisheye lens mode at 97%. I have another Arctic I work with a lot that just wants to work in 50 degrees. He hates me every time I open it up into that wide angle. Sky, you can set all your skies and also your outputs. So sometimes you might have different outputs, and these outputs you can set up for your movies and the like. Other things that I didn't touch on just right then is polystyrene models, which it should open up. Yep, and it's a bit hard when it's at night time to actually see how this actually functions and works. But it's a kind of a similar outcome to the white. And then light view. So you can see how much light exposure each of the surfaces are getting at particular times. It's not a use I use very often, but it's pretty powerful in kind of seeing where light and shade and the differentials of light actually work. So that's kind of really cool things with all the presets. So let's go back to none, and we'll stick with our 2-point perspective, and we'll go back out to 97, which is my favorite. Oh, that's exposure, don't mind me. Field of views down here. If only ever I get that right. But you can see here now how crisp and clear that is. Now, it's all good and well. We're floating around in the model here within Enscape or within Archicad. What we really want to be able to do is to get exports out of this. So there are a number of different exports that we can achieve out of Enscape. So first of all is views. So we can click on this and get a view, and you'll see some of the views that I've created from this model in my conclusion. We can also do batch rendering, so you can batch render all the different images set up from your views. We can set up a 360 mono panorama or stereo panorama. Now, why that's grayed out right now is because we're set to 2-point perspective. Once we're set to normal perspective, you can pick up either of those, and there'll be a present at the end of this presentation that I'll put out for you so that you can actually have a look at one of those. And then there's also executables, web standalone and executable standalone. So this is an environment where you can send the model to a client or a stakeholder that doesn't actually have Enscape on their computer or Archicad or the internet turned on, and they can actually walk around the environment either in normal walking mode or actually in VR, which VR unfortunately do need to be connected to the internet because of Oculus. The web standalone gives the ability for you to, this is hosted up on Enscape's website or behind a portal on Enscape's cloud, which you can then access. One thing I didn't just touch on, I jumped over, is the movie mode. So in this movie mode, you can actually create a movie with all the different times of day, different positions. So basically you're actually setting up a cinematography as to how you want this to be pushed out. Now the beauty of this is how quick this is creating. So for people that are used to Archicad, let's just hit this button to my desktop really quick, and this is 100% live, no speeding up whatsoever. So for those people that are used to cinema render within Archicad, you know how long that takes to push out renders and set materials and get them looking right. In here right now, you just saw it took literally under 5 seconds to export that out. So there's so many benefits in all of that. So I think I've covered off on all of that, and we'll go back to the conclusion. So here you can see the final render from a video that you can save off as an MP4 at a high resolution. So all I've done here is just done a very quick render output. The file that we're using is by no means perfect in the sense of the textures and that apply to all of the finishes and the surfaces. The content that's in there isn't perfect either. But what you can see from something that we've pushed together and rushed, the actual quality of the output's actually quite good considering the lack of effort that's actually gone into the model to actually generate it and create it. So that's kind of one of the things. Now, today we didn't have time to talk about this, and it's one of those things that bugs me in some ways, but is actually probably the best component about Enscape as it stands. We can be in Enscape and Archicad sitting on a laptop in our client's house or at our client's office. And by having Archicad open and Enscape open, within one click, we can be into an Oculus Rift, and your client is then walking virtually around their building. Now, when I was putting this presentation together, I was contemplating putting a couple of photos of my clients actually in to this presentation, but I thought, no, I won't do that because it's going to a global audience. We don't want to, have them seeing that, in terms of their privacy. But I can tell you right now that the investment in an Oculus Rift headset, a laptop, and an Enscape license has more than paid for itself with the number of presentations which I've had with clients. They've identified things that they've loved about the project. They've been able to identify things that they would like changed because they were in that environment that would never have picked up any other way. So from my perspective, the VR component and how quick and easy you can attach that to Archicad, for me, is a huge important process, which, we ran out of time today. We didn't get really any time at all to talk about it, but I just wanted to raise it now. And it's also a lot better in a face-to-face environment as well. You can kind of see how people interact with it. So in terms of a conclusion, so let's try and wrap this up because we've got very little time left. But let's talk about the positives and negatives. Okay, so with Enscape, what is it about Enscape that first of all, I want to touch on some of the negatives. Because the tool is so simple to use, you automatically kind of go into this approach where you just jump in without any training. So the simplicity of the tool actually puts you into a false sense of security and thinking you don't need training. Now, I can put my hand up and say that was me. Now, what we need to do now is, the first thing you need to do is, the user interface is being upgraded just this year with Enscape 3.0, and it's made it seems even simpler. So one of the things I want to suggest to you is please do some training. When you put this software into your practice, please do. It'll only take you one day. It doesn't take much training at all, but it will help. So one really good example is the libraries. So there's a little checkbox down the bottom right-hand corner says offline library. The first couple of times you open up Enscape and you go into the library to put assets down, you'll realize that it takes a long time for it to load. Well, you can actually load that onto your local drive of your computer and access it directly from there, which speeds it right up. Whereas if I'd done some training on it, I would have known straight away. The only other negative that I kind of point to quite a bit, but the thing is that this is consistent across all of the rendering softwares, is the fact that if I'm placing Enscape content into my Archicad file, I can't use it in BIMX. And it's because of the methodology that Enscape are doing, which is really smart because they're wanting to try and reduce the number of polygons in Archicad to not bog it down. But in an ideal world, you could place that object in Archicad or in Enscape, and it would then be able to be used in BIMX or BIMX presentations for clients because they're equally important, and then through to visualization. Now, this isn't a critique directly drawn at Enscape. It's of all visualization tools. The only other thing is there's no parametric nature in any of the objects of the Enscape library. From my view, that's kind of, I guess, the key things from my mind that are kind of that drive it down. From a positive standpoint, right? So we've talked about all the negatives, and they're very few, right? And ironically, the methodology in which you engage with libraries within Enscape is substantially better than its competitors because it's actually outside of Archicad. Whereas here, with the Enscape workflows, you're actually dealing with the content, Enscape content within Archicad, which to me makes a lot more sense because you can then accurately place things millimeter perfect. Whereas other rendering engines, it's kind of approximation, which to me doesn't make sense. If you're wanting to present something that's more accurate and more real, you got to be more real about it. So from a positive standpoint, I actually positively think it's the easiest tool for anyone to pick up and create visualizations from nothing. I honestly think that from a business standpoint, first and foremost, Enscape and the comments that I've had back from my clients has been to me to date that they have not seen any better renders produced from their suppliers that they're working with currently. So it's the best that they've seen. Now, I'm not doing anything special. I'm producing, I'd say I'm producing moderate quality outputs, but compared to what other people within industry are producing within the time frames and the time and the price points that we're not going to the high end renderers where they're paying $3,000-$4,000 an image. It's being able to produce that output constantly and consistently very, very quickly for clients. And to me, that's really, really important. You need it to be able to key into your current processes and make it really quick and easy to produce outputs when you are in a rush and ready, rushing to get a presentation out the door. To me, it's the perfect tool. And because of that, this tool, I can tell you right now, and the work that I've done with my client, they're wanting to come back to me and work with me on more and more projects. So my investment in this tool, and it's a huge surprise. I didn't realize how much some of these clients would engage in just those visualizations, that they'd want to come back for more. Now, this isn't without the VR. From my perspective, VR should be on every single project. And the methodology that we have with the Enscape connection to Archicad and the direct link and being able to put a VR headset on, make live changes in Archicad and it come through and sync through to Enscape, to me, there's no competition at all. Yes, there is connectivity between the other tool and Archicad, but it never, ever bloody works for me. And maybe that's me. Maybe I'm the problem. But in any case, moving on, for those that want to be able to interact with the 3D panorama, the 360-degree panorama, you can now actually take a shot of this QR code. Now, there's a reason why I didn't show it to you during the middle of my presentation. You would never have listened to my conclusion. You would never have heard what I was talking about at the end. So now I'd like to get you to have the opportunity to pull up that QR code, have a look for yourself, see what I've done in such a short period of time, and enjoy the output that I have for you. So thanks very much, and I hope you enjoyed listening. It was very short and sharp, and we wouldn't have got to cover everything that we needed to today. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now in the chat. I look forward to talking to you. Sorry guys, I dropped you for a few seconds there. I clicked the wrong button. It must have been while I was sipping my Red Bull. So sorry about that. But anyway, we made it all the way through with only one glitch so far, and it had to be right now. But there's a great comment here starting off in the chat. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat now, and I will try to answer them before the end of this session. It's a perfect point there about the worst part about clients faking their understanding. They don't want to feel dumb. I can tell you now, I've sat in meetings and you can tell when a client doesn't understand what you're presenting to them. And the problem is that I was typically, like I was the youngest director in my business, and I can tell you now, when you sit there and you're seeing other people talking and communicating, but they're not actually watching and observing the client sitting there and kind of, using visual tells that you can see when someone doesn't understand what's going on. I think they're the type of things that we as architects need to be more aware of. Take the time to sit down and make a client realize that, you understand that they don't know how to read drawings, and appreciate them and talk to them about how they understand it. It's like earlier today where Rosie was talking about people that are colorblind and taking consideration the colors that they're using in their presentation work and in their documentation. All of these things need to be considered. Think about who you're communicating to, because unfortunately the human nature is I'm too embarrassed to say, oh, I can't do this, I don't know the answer. So that's really important. Min's got a question there about, will there be a future where we model purely in VR on Archicad, similar to videos of people playing Minecraft? I think motion sickness is probably going to cause a lot of people grief. I know latency is getting better and better, and video cards are getting faster and faster, and the VR side of things is getting better. But I don't know if it'll go that far. I kind of look at these other things, like there's other tools or other special devices that come out, like Leap Motion and 3D sketching and all that sort of stuff, that may be the piece. And augmented reality and holographic displays and projections might come up where it actually builds the model. People talk about the idea of using touchscreens. Jan would get really excited if they spent all day in VR modeling. One of the things I think about Archicad and modeling in 3D is the accuracy and the level of accuracy. It's really hard to get that right. Gemma, thanks a lot, mate. Marcus, yeah, mate, it is stunning. It is. It's really good, and I think the only reason why it was this product was kind of out of sight and out of mind for Archicad users is because we couldn't connect to it. It was a product that Revit users have been using for years because of the connectivity, and it's so popular in the Revit community because of the fact of how good it is. Min, I think with Enscape you can also export an exe file. Yes. So I did touch on it quickly. You can send an executable file to them, but you can also host the file on the internet as well through a web through the Enscape cloud. So it's quite good. Jamie, I saw that Gemma gave you the details on that website. Actually, there are some really good webinars that have been produced from Kai from Enscape. He actually helped train me because as I said earlier, I picked up the software, looked too easy, and jumped straight in with no training, and had some crashes. And one conversation with him and watching a webinar that he put together, I actually saved myself and pulled myself out. So that's why I recommend training. But in some of those webinars, there are a lot more details on some of those great sites you can get content from. Hi, John. Yep, it is. That's the one thing that it is so much better. There's numerous conversations I hear with people that are on Macs that are using another tool, and the number of crashes they're having, the failures of connectivity. It's happening quite a bit. Yeah, downside is PC. So guys, when you registered, you would have seen the question about whether you're on PC or Mac. That was a question. Purposely, I had a conversation with the guys at Enscape, and I said, "Do you know the number of Archicad users that use Macs?" And I said, "That's if you want to try and break into the Archicad market, a lot of the Archicad market just aren't on PC." And you got to understand that Enscape was developed and is used by a lot of Revit users, and Revit's being a software that's used on PCs. That's what they've started on their platform. So moving into the future, it might be a different story. We might see that if there's enough uptake or interest from the market. I think Enscape have a feature request thing on their site. I can't remember. There we go. Bjorn's put the playlist up, the YouTube playlist. Thanks for the presentation. I have one question regarding how do you find more work to be done compared to better adjustments with clients seen since VR makes them spot more errors. This is a really good one. So you raise an interesting point, and my role as an architect is a different one to my predecessors that I've learnt from. I'd rather a client know exactly what they're getting before it's built. I want them to see exactly what they're getting. I want them to love every part of it. And how much easier is it to change the design in concept design than it is to change it at the end of documentation or when it's built? And what you want to achieve at the end of the project is a client that's absolutely stoked with the solution. You want them to see them so happy with what they've got that they recommend you to all of their other network. And from my perspective, yes, it adds a little bit of extra work early on, but you know what? It doesn't matter. It actually doesn't take that much time. If you actually have a good understanding of your client to start with, it makes it quite easy. Like I can explain 2 or 3 weeks ago, standing in my client's rumpus room. This is because I had a problem with my internet connection, so my Wi-Fi driver had failed, so we had to plug into the nearest point that we could get. And they had the VR headset on. I'm looking on my laptop screen, and they're pointing at things and saying, "Can we change this? Can we change that?" And I'm standing there writing notes. So from my perspective, for the client being in the VR environment, it's the easiest way for them to communicate back to you, and to the point where this client said to me, "Is like, my wife will not understand the architectural drawings. Can you bring your headset over?" And they spent half an hour with it on. And another residential client I worked with, I took the headset up. They'd never been in VR environment ever before, and they basically walked around their house for 45 minutes looking at every nook and cranny. And it's just because they're excited, because they're investing, $2 million in a new home. They want to see what they're getting. And I think, to me, that's a really important ability to give them, to actually see what they're getting. Because, when you go and buy a brand new car today, you'll want to, deck it out on the website. There's all this technology now where you can choose the paint colors, choose all the attachments, and then spin the thing around. And that's only an investment of, $30,000 to $100,000. It's not a $2 million home. So I think the role of the architect is now clearer communication so that the client can tell you if there's problems earlier on. And it's kind of trying to work alongside, the whole purpose of VR is to try and work in line with the McLeamy curve. So you're actually giving clients the ability to make the decisions when the price to change it is a lot less. So any more questions at all? Or we now take a break, have a sip of another Red Bull, hopefully not make another button pushing mistake, and move on to the next session in about 7 minutes time. So thanks very much for listening, guys, and hopefully you can see the benefits of Enscape as much as I do. Oh, Bjorn's got one more question. Oh no, he says if he has any more questions. No worries, mate. Thanks a lot.